We need to discard the popular image of the medieval world as a chaotic landscape of mud and ignorance. When we strip away the Hollywood stereotypes, we uncover a society built on highly engineered survival systems. Medieval people were hyper-observant pragmatists. They constructed sophisticated technologies using the materials available to them: compacted dirt, pressed wax, and a deep understanding of human psychology. Their innovation operated entirely off the grid. Without industrial power, their engineering solutions were strictly dictated by severe environmental constraints. To understand how they mastered this reality, we will examine their methods for decoding time, surviving severe climate shifts, executing agricultural logistics, and administering the massive bureaucracies of war and death. Severe resource limitations forced humanity to adopt extreme optimization and ruthless efficiency. This diagram shows a rigid modern clock face deconstructing into a fluid sun path. The medieval hour was not a fixed 60 minutes. It expanded and contracted with the seasons, adapting to the available daylight. Labor operated on a biological battery model. Work was intense during the long days of summer, but ceased almost entirely during mandatory winter pauses, when the frozen soil made farming impossible. In environments cut off from the sun and stars, time tracking required physical tools. Monks in scriptoriums, dedicated rooms in monasteries for copying manuscripts, relied on water clocks and precisely marked candles to measure the progression of their work. For complex scheduling, they used the astrolabe, a handheld astronomical instrument measuring the altitude of celestial bodies to calculate time and position. This portable interface physically encoded scientific calculations and religious data, allowing users to accurately track prayer times alongside celestial movements. The integration of religious feast days and natural seasonal cycles meant the average peasant performed heavy labor for roughly 150 days a year. Medieval timekeeping was engineered to align human activity directly with planetary cycles rather than industrial quotas. Survival became an acute engineering problem during the Little Ice Age, a prolonged period of regional cooling from the 14th to 19th centuries that froze rivers solid and collapsed agricultural systems across Europe. This diagram shows the thermal cross-section of an underground shelter. Medieval builders bypassed the freezing surface air entirely, digging down to use the Earth's natural mass as insulation to trap heat. Winter travel demanded severe logistical discipline. Travelers relied on small, tightly controlled microfires and exploited natural geographic hollows to maintain body heat through freezing nights. A critical element of winter endurance was walnut oil. It served as a highly versatile multi-tool, providing calorie-dense nutrition, clean light, and a sealant for preserving stored food. Indoors, walnut oil lamps burned cleanly and steadily. This protected families and monastic scribes from the heavy smoke and respiratory illnesses caused by burning cheap animal fats. Planting walnut trees functioned as a multi-generational financial investment. These drought-resistant trees stabilized the regional economy of Aquitaine, a historical region in southwestern France characterized by a climate highly favorable to walnut cultivation. Winter survival relied on practical engineering, digging down into the earth for thermal efficiency and utilizing resilient plant-based fats to outlast a hostile climate. Modern wheat functions like a high-maintenance sports car. It requires perfect soil chemistry, predictable weather, and immense artificial support to yield a harvest. This comparison chart shows modern wheat failing under frost, while medieval barley remains structurally intact. Grains like barley, oats, and rye acted as off-road tanks, thriving in poor soil and extreme weather. The robust physical structure of these grain stalks allowed them to withstand heavy rains and late frosts that would cause more delicate crops to rot in the fields. When primary harvests failed, farmers planted millet as a last resort backup. Millet grows aggressively in dry, rocky soil and can be harvested in just 60 days. Grains like spelts and emmer provided intense energy density. These nutrient-heavy crops powered Roman marching columns and sustained medieval laborers through physically exhausting days. The medieval food supply prioritized absolute reliability over high yields. They engineered a diverse portfolio of resilient, slow-burn energy sources to guarantee survival. The romantic image of the gleaming medieval knight ignores the reality of military administration. Gathering an army was chaotic. It relied on oral contracts, decentralized local obligations, and exhausted heralds shouting orders across disconnected medieval villages. Launching an invasion required staggering logistics. Loading thousands of frightened war horses, heavily armed men, and perishable food supplies onto primitive transport ships was a complex engineering problem. The night before a battle involved intense manual labor. Blacksmiths worked continuously to repair 55 pounds of armor per night, while archers systematically inspected thousands of individual arrow shafts for microfractures. Intelligence gathering took the form of gossip warfare. Spies, disguised as traveling merchants or monks, memorized troop counts and mapped supply lines by listening to careless conversations in local taverns. Military success required extreme bureaucracy. Charlemagne enforced standardized weights, measures, and written laws, whereas kings like Richard the Lionheart neglected logistics in favor of personal battlefield glory. Charlemagne's administrative discipline is visible in his architectural center at Aachen. This structure reflected the organized control he exerted over the Carolingian Empire, a massive Frankish-dominated territory that spanned Western and Central Europe. This tradition of logistical engineering traces back to the ancient world. The Roman navy recognized their disadvantage against the superior Carthaginian fleet and invented a device called the corvus. This schematic shows the mechanics of the corvus. It was a heavy wooden boarding bridge equipped with an iron spike, designed to drop from a Roman prow and lock onto the deck of an enemy ship. By locking the ships together, Roman legionaries swarmed across the bridge. They transformed a chaotic naval skirmish into a disciplined infantry battle, neutralizing Carthage's advantage. Ancient and medieval victories relied on pragmatic engineering, strict supply chains, and administrative discipline. Medieval people encountered terrifying natural anomalies and built rational hypotheses to explain them. When they unearthed massive prehistoric mammoth bones, they logically concluded that races of giant warriors had once walked the earth. The infamous dancing plague was a documented physiological event. Mass hysteria, severe psychological stress, or ergot poisoning triggered involuntary, exhaustive trances that lasted for days. Reports of blood rain were accurate descriptions of rare weather events. High winds carried red Saharan dust across continents, mixing with atmospheric moisture to stain the landscape an unsettling rust color. They approached death with the same systematic logic, engineering public reminders of mortality. Cadaver monuments were commissioned by the elite to visually demonstrate the temporary nature of worldly wealth. These are known as transitombs. A transitomb is a funerary monument featuring a sculpted effigy of a decaying corpse, capturing the gruesome physical transition from life to decomposition. This morbid realism stood in stark contrast to the traditional gisant. A gisant is a recumbent tomb effigy depicting the deceased in pristine condition, resting with open eyes and hands clasped in eternal prayer. Transporting fallen nobility from distant crusades required the extreme logistics of mos teutonicus. Mos teutonicus was a post-mortem practice where a corpse was boiled to separate the flesh from the bones, allowing for hygienic long-distance transport. At the Sedlic ossuary, monks applied meticulous spatial management to the dead. Facing limited cemetery space, they organized the skeletal remains of tens of thousands of people into highly structured decorative architecture. Faced with the terrifying unknowns of nature and mortality, medieval society reacted by categorizing anomalies and building rigid, logical systems to process them. We have examined the mechanical realities of the medieval world, the fluid measurement of time, the thermal logistics of winter survival, the agricultural resilience of their grain networks, and the complex administration of their armies and dead. The brass astrolabe, the underground thermal shelter, the wooden walnut press, the robust stalks of barley and rye. Highly calibrated mechanisms like these sustained human life, allowing structured culture and art to flourish in an unforgiving environment. The defining characteristic of the Middle Ages is endurance. They optimized their physical realities, engineering survival systems that worked in rhythm with a harsh, unyielding planet. The so-called Dark Ages were entirely rational. They only appear dark to those who refuse